I still remember the way my grandfather smiled at me from across his worn kitchen table. He taught me that true wealth was found in how we lived our lives, not the numbers in our bank accounts. When he passed away and left me his estate, I never expected the inheritance would expose the true colors of the people who were supposed to love me most. My parents abandoned me years ago when I refused to follow their path, but now they were back with perfect smiles and designer clothes, ready to help manage what they saw as their golden ticket. Before I tell you how my parents' smiles disappeared forever in that courtroom, let me know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and subscribe to hear more stories about family betrayals and unexpected justice. Growing up in a modest neighborhood in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, I learned early that my parents, Richard and Linda, viewed money as the ultimate measure of success and control. Our house was always filled with conversations about status, appearances, and climbing the social ladder. While we lived comfortably in a middle-class lifestyle, my parents acted as though we were one smart investment away from joining the elite. My childhood memories are stained with moments of financial manipulation. When I was 14 and wanted to join the school band, my father agreed to buy me a saxophone only if I maintained perfect grades. The moment I brought home a B+ in chemistry, he threatened to sell it. "Money is power, Ethan," he said. "Those who control the money make the rules." My mother was equally calculating. For my 16th birthday, she bought me a car but insisted on holding the title. "We paid for it, so we decide when you can use it," she explained, taking away my keys after I chose to volunteer at a local shelter instead of attending a networking event with her colleagues. College decisions became another battleground. I dreamed of studying marine biology, but they insisted on business school. "We'll only pay tuition if you major in something practical," my father declared. When I applied for student loans to pursue my own path, they sabotaged my applications by refusing to provide their financial information. At 22, I broke free. With $300 saved from odd jobs, I boarded a bus to San Francisco, determined to build a life on my own terms. The tiny studio apartment I could barely afford became my sanctuary. My entry-level job at an environmental nonprofit paid just enough to keep ramen noodles in my cupboard, but for the first time, no one was using money to dictate my choices. My parents reduced contact to obligatory holiday calls, each conversation laced with reminders of how I'd thrown away opportunities and would never amount to anything without their guidance. I accepted the distance as the price of freedom. But one family member never tried to control me, my grandfather, James, a self-made man who built a modest construction company through decades of honest work. He lived simply despite his success. During childhood summers at his lakeside cabin, he taught me to fish, build birdhouses, and value integrity above all else. "Money's just a tool, Ethan," he'd say as we sat in his small fishing boat. "Like any tool, it can build wonderful things or cause terrible damage, depending on the hands that wield it." After my move to California, those fishing trips became phone calls. Every Sunday evening, we'd talk about my new life, his garden, books we were reading, and the state of the world. He never criticized my modest apartment or entry-level salary, instead expressing pride in my independence and courage to forge my own path. When James turned 87, his health began to decline. I took unpaid leave from work and spent his final months by his side. We had deep conversations about life and legacy during those quiet days. Sometimes, between doses of medication, he'd make cryptic comments I only understood later. "I've been watching, Ethan," he said one evening as the sun set outside his bedroom window, watching and taking notes. "Some people show their true character when they think no one's looking." Another time, as I helped him organize his papers, he squeezed my hand and said, "I'm setting things right, son. Some lessons can only be taught after we're gone." I was holding that same weathered hand when he took his final breath 3 months later. The loss left a hole in my heart no inheritance could fill, a grandfather who loved me for who I was, not what he could mold me into. 3 days after the funeral, I got a call from William Carter, my grandfather's attorney. His voice was formal yet kind as he informed me I'd been named the primary beneficiary of James's estate. "The reading of the will is scheduled for next Friday," he explained. "Your grandfather requested all family members be present for the formal proceedings." I thanked him numbly, still processing. James had never mentioned leaving me anything substantial. I assumed his modest home and savings would be divided among family members. The idea of being the primary beneficiary left me reeling. Within hours of James's death hitting the local obituary column, my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in years. My mother's voice came through with artificial warmth. "Ethan, darling, we just heard about poor James. We're absolutely devastated. Your father and I are booking flights right now to help with arrangements." The timing of their renewed interest was suspicious after years of minimal contact, but grief clouded my judgment. Maybe James's death was bringing the family together. I agreed to meet them at the airport, hoping for genuine reconciliation. That hope faded when they emerged from the terminal. My father sported an expensive new watch, my mother a designer outfit inappropriate for a funeral visit. Their first questions were about James's house, not his final days or how I was coping. At the modest funeral service James requested, my parents networked with relatives like it was a business convention. My father cornered James's golf buddies to discuss property values in the neighborhood. My mother examined the antique grandfather clock in the hallway, commenting on its auction value. Such a waste, I overheard my father say to a distant cousin. A successful man like James should have had a grand send-off, not this budget affair. But we'll make sure his legacy is properly managed. Before the reception food was cleared, my parents moved their luggage into James's house, claiming the master bedroom to sort things out properly. I watched in stunned silence as they began cataloging valuables, discussing what to sell or keep. That old boat needs to go immediately, my father declared, referring to the fishing boat where I learned life's biggest lessons. We could get a nice modern speedboat, something with actual value. My mother placed sticky notes on furniture, already redesigning the house in her mind. Once we update this place, we could easily double its market value, she said, ignoring that I lived 500 miles away with no plans to move back. Their presumptions grew bolder. Over dinner, they discussed fixing Ethan's financial mistakes and outlined how they'd help me invest my portion of the inheritance, as if they'd already decided how James's assets would be divided. You've always been impulsive with money, son, my father said, pouring himself another glass of James's special occasion whiskey. Thankfully, we're here now to make sure you don't squander this opportunity. My mother nodded. We sacrificed everything to raise you properly. Now we can finally see some return on our investment. The old tactics emerged, guilt about their supposed sacrifices, suggestions I owed them for basic parental duties, implications I was too irresponsible to manage wealth. They alternated between extravagant promises of family vacations and thinly veiled threats about family obligations. By the morning of the will reading, my parents had plans for their share of James's estate, discussing a vacation property in Florida and investments with his business partners. The law office of Carter and Associates occupied the 10th floor of a downtown building. The reception area had leather chairs, oak paneling, and a city skyline view James would have appreciated for its craftsmanship, not prestige. As family members arrived, my parents positioned themselves as unofficial greeters, shaking hands and making small talk like they were hosting. My mother wore a new outfit with pearl earrings that caught the light. My father, in a tailored suit with gold cufflinks, looked every bit the successful businessman ready to take charge. Ethan's understandably overwhelmed, I overheard my father tell my Aunt Susan. Thankfully, we have experience managing substantial assets and can guide him through this transition. My mother added, we've already identified promising investment opportunities for the estate funds. Once everything's settled, we'll make sure everyone benefits appropriately. Their confidence bordered on arrogance as they made promises to relatives. Uncle David was assured the vintage car collection would be evaluated, with special consideration for his interest in the 1967 Mustang. Cousin Rachel was told her student loans might be addressed once liquid assets were organized. I sat quietly in a corner, watching this performance with growing unreality. My parents had mastered speaking with such authority that others rarely questioned them. Now, surrounded by grieving family, they were at their manipulative best. At 10 o'clock sharp, William Carter entered with a leather portfolio. His silver hair and measured movements commanded instant respect, quieting the room. Two younger attorneys followed with documents and a laptop. Thank you all for coming today, William began formally. We're gathered to execute the last will and testament of James Robert Thompson in accordance with his explicit instructions. My father nodded approvingly at the formal proceedings, my mother straightening in her chair, both clearly anticipating their financial elevation. William covered standard provisions, funeral arrangements already executed, charitable donations to James's favorite environmental organizations, small personal items bequeathed to friends. With each moment, my parents leaned forward, their anticipation palpable. Before proceeding to the distribution of major assets, William continued, I'm required to disclose the total value of the estate. He adjusted his glasses and read from a document, the estimated value of James Thompson's estate, including real estate, business interests, investment portfolios, and personal property, is $4,850,000. A collective gasp filled the room. Even I was shocked. James had lived modestly, driving the same truck for 20 years, wearing shirts until they frayed. The wealth seemed incompatible with the man I knew, until I remembered his patient investments and disciplined saving over 6 decades. My father's eyes widened, and he squeezed my mother's hand triumphantly, exchanging knowing glances as if their suspicions of a jackpot were confirmed. My mother opened her designer notebook, jotting down figures, likely recalculating her plans. Now, regarding the distribution of the estate, William continued, his tone steady. James Thompson left specific and detailed instructions. He opened a sealed envelope and removed several pages. I'll now read James's personal message in its entirety, as required by his instructions. William cleared his throat and began, in James's unmistakable, straightforward manner, to my beloved grandson, Ethan, throughout your life, I've watched you grow into a man of integrity and independence, despite challenging circumstances. You chose a difficult path of self-reliance rather than surrender your principles for financial comfort. That choice confirmed what I always believed about your character. I've also observed, with great disappointment, the behavior of my son Richard and his wife, Linda. Their pattern of using money as a tool for control rather than support has been consistent throughout your upbringing and into your adult years. Their absence during your struggles and their sudden reappearance now that financial gain seems possible speaks volumes about their priorities. My father shifted uncomfortably, my mother's pen stopping mid-notebook. The room went silent. William continued, therefore, I make the following distributions. To my son Richard Thompson and his wife, Linda Thompson, I leave the sum of $1,000 each. This token amount reflects the transactional nature of the relationship they chose to establish with their only son. The remainder of my estate, in its entirety, I bequeath to my grandson Ethan Thompson, with the explicit condition that his parents shall have no access to or influence over these funds. Any attempt by Richard or Linda to contest this will or exert control over these assets will result in their token inheritance being revoked and donated to environmental conservation. The silence turned tense, almost vibrating. My father's face flushed red, my mother's drained of color. Her notebook slipped to the floor, the sound echoing in the stunned room. This is outrageous, my father erupted, standing so fast his chair tipped backward. James was clearly not of sound mind. We demand to see the official document. William calmly slid the papers across the table. The will has been properly executed with 2 witnesses and notarized according to state law. Additionally, James anticipated your reaction and prepared further documentation. He nodded to an attorney, who connected the laptop to a wall-mounted screen. My grandfather's face appeared in a video, sitting in his study, alert and composed, speaking directly to the camera. If this recording is being played, it means Richard and Linda have challenged my decision. I want to state unequivocally that I'm of sound mind and body. My doctor has confirmed this, and medical documentation has been provided to my attorney. He shifted, his expression hardening. I make this decision after years of observation. Richard and Linda have consistently used financial leverage to manipulate and control Ethan throughout his life. They withdrew support when he chose education over business, threatened and belittled him when he pursued independence, and abandoned him entirely when he refused to comply with their demands. His eyes seemed to pierce through my parents'. They've shown no interest in his welfare for 8 years, making no effort to assist during periods of hardship. Their renewed interest, coinciding precisely with my declining health and imminent passing, demonstrates their true motivations. My mother began sobbing dramatically, my father pacing the conference room. This is slander, he shouted. We've always wanted what's best for Ethan. James poisoned him against us. The recording continued. I've documented 17 specific instances of financial manipulation, including intercepted student loan applications, withdrawn tuition support as punishment, and deliberate sabotage of Ethan's early career opportunities when he refused to follow their chosen path. These documents are included in the confidential addendum to my will. James's voice softened. This decision is made not out of malice but protection. Ethan deserves the chance to determine his own future without the burden of manipulation that has characterized his relationship with his parents. My hope is that this inheritance will free him forever from their influence. As the video ended, my father turned to me, his strategy shifting to negotiation. Ethan, you know this isn't right. We're your parents. We deserve what, exactly? I interrupted, my voice steady, surprising myself. A reward for disappearing from my life for 8 years? Compensation for showing up only when there's money to be gained? My mother tried tears, streaming perfectly down her cheeks without disturbing her makeup. We've always loved you, Ethan. Your grandfather misunderstood our intentions. We can work this out as a family, share the inheritance the way James would have truly wanted. I looked at her, really looked at her, maybe for the first time as an adult. I saw not a mother grieving or concerned for her son, but a performer playing a role for a financial outcome. Something broke and reset inside me. No, I said simply, the word hanging between us. 8 years of independence had changed me more than they realized. I was no longer the compliant son swayed by guilt or manipulation. My father's expression hardened. "After everything we've done for you, what exactly have you done for me in the past 8 years?" I asked, voice level. "When I was eating ramen noodles every meal because my non-profit job barely covered rent, where were you? When I needed surgery 2 years ago and set up a payment plan with the hospital, did you call even once?" My mother interjected, "We were giving you space to learn independence." "No," I cut her off. "You were punishing me for not following your plan." The only family member who stood by me was Grandpa James. He called every week, sent care packages when money was tight, flew out to help after my surgery. I stood, drawing strength from James's quiet wisdom. What you're doing right now, showing up only when there's money, is exactly why James made this decision. My father's face contorted with rage. "We'll contest this will." James was clearly senile. William cleared his throat. "Mr. Thompson, I'd strongly advise against making unfounded accusations about your father's mental state. He underwent a complete cognitive assessment 2 weeks before signing this will. The medical documentation is extensive and conclusive. Furthermore," he opened another folder. James anticipated a challenge and documented his reasoning extensively, including bank records, correspondence, and sworn statements from objective third parties regarding patterns of behavior. "Contesting this will would be both expensive and frankly embarrassing for you." Aunt Susan, who'd been quiet, stood up. "I think we all heard what James wanted. Frankly, Richard, everything he said matches what I've observed for years about how you treated Ethan." Other family members nodded, years of unspoken observations finding confirmation. My parents gathered their belongings hastily, my father announcing loudly we'd hear from their attorney. As they stormed toward the exit, my mother turned back for one final manipulation. "If you let this stand, Ethan, you'll no longer be our son." I met her gaze steadily. "I stopped being your son the day I realized your love was conditional on my obedience. Grandpa James was more of a parent to me than either of you ever were." After the meeting, I returned to James's house to find my parents packing valuable items into their suitcases, artwork, silver, even James's war medals. When I confronted them, my father claimed they were family heirlooms James would have wanted them to have. When they refused to return the items, I called the police to escort them from the property. As officers supervised their departure, my mother hissed, "You'll regret this betrayal for the rest of your life." My father promised financial ruin through extended legal battles. True to their word, they hired expensive attorneys to contest the will on grounds of undue influence. The 6-month legal battle revealed more evidence supporting James's decision. Their attorneys found nothing to support claims of mental incapacity or manipulation. When the judge dismissed their case with prejudice, stating the evidence overwhelmingly supported the deceased's concerns about financial manipulation, my parents made one final attempt to negotiate, offering to drop future claims for 20% of the estate. My answer was firm, no. The months following were liberating yet painful. Though I'd kept emotional distance from my parents for years, the finality of our separation left a void. Some nights, I sat on James's porch, looking at old family photos, mourning not what was, but what could have been. Yet each week, the weight of their expectations and manipulation lifted. For the first time, I could make decisions without calculating the emotional cost of their disapproval. The inheritance remained largely untouched in accounts James established, managed by financial advisors he'd chosen for their expertise and integrity. When I was ready to address the estate, my first action was establishing the James Thompson Foundation for Environmental Education, dedicating $1 million to scholarships and research opportunities in the field I'd always wanted to study, focusing on students whose families couldn't or wouldn't assist with educational expenses. I bought a small house near a nature preserve, nothing extravagant, but with a workshop for building birdhouses in James's tradition and a back porch perfect for morning coffee and reflection. The remaining inheritance was invested in sustainable companies and ethical business practices. Physical distance from my parents became emotional healing. I started working with a therapist specializing in family financial trauma, unpacking the complex relationship between love, money, and control that shaped my early years. My therapist observed, "Money magnifies who we already are. Your grandfather's wealth magnified his generosity and wisdom, your parents' response to the possibility of wealth magnified their controlling nature, and your inheritance is magnifying your thoughtfulness and desire to create positive impact." Unexpected connections emerged from the family fracture. Aunt Susan, who stood up for me at the will reading, became a regular part of my life. Uncle David, who'd kept polite distance during my estrangement, invited me to his workshop to restore James's beloved fishing boat. Cousins I barely knew reached out with stories about my grandfather, expanding my understanding of his life and legacy. Together, we formed a chosen family based on genuine care, not financial obligation or genetic coincidence. Our holiday gatherings were modest compared to the elaborate events my parents insisted on, but filled with authentic laughter and acceptance. 2 years after James's passing, I received a small package from an unfamiliar address. Inside was his worn fishing hat and a sealed envelope dated 1 month before his death. The letter contained a few lines in his familiar handwriting. "Ethan, wear this old hat when you need to remember what matters. True wealth is never measured by dollars, but by the freedom to live according to your values. Your parents may never understand that. The real inheritance I leave you is not in my bank accounts, but in the example of a life well lived. I'm prouder of you than you'll ever know. Love, Grandpa James." I framed the letter and hung it in my workshop where I see it every day. The fishing hat went on a special hook by the door, ready whenever I need its wisdom. As for my parents, I heard through family they moved to Arizona, still telling anyone who'll listen they were robbed of their rightful inheritance. They found a new social circle where their version of events garners sympathy, returning to their pattern of leveraging appearances for advantage. I feel no anger toward them anymore, only calm acceptance that some relationships can't be healed when the fundamental understanding of love is so different. My grandfather gave me not just financial freedom, but the greater gift of emotional liberation from toxic patterns that bound our family for generations. The true inheritance was never about the $4.85 million, it was about inheriting my freedom. Have you ever had to stand your ground against family pressure, especially when money was involved? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the hardest battles we fight are with the people supposed to love us most. If this story resonated, please subscribe to hear more real-life experiences about finding strength in difficult situations. Drop a like if you believe, like my grandfather did, that the most valuable inheritance is not measured in dollars, but in lessons and freedom. Thank you for listening, and remember, family is about love and support, not control and manipulation. Share this story with someone who might need to hear that message today.